Imagine this scenario. A really severe famine grips the land, hardship is just everywhere, and you've got this group of people desperate for survival, and they resort to an unconventional tactic, maybe even a shocking one. What lines might they cross when their very existence is on the line?
It's a powerful ethical dilemma, isn't it? Because that's precisely the situation that unfolds in this ancient Buddhist monastic text we're going to take a deep dive into today. It's the Pāli Vinaya, specifically the Pārājika, number 4.
Savajika Tepa.
Yeah, and this text, it really illuminates a fascinating kind of enduring challenge to integrity and, the profound consequences of choices made under that kind of extreme pressure.
So our mission today really is to unpack a story that reveals these timeless truths about deception, about integrity, and what it truly means to be spiritually authentic. You're going to discover how these ancient rules laid bare some very, very modern human tendencies.
Absolutely. And why distinguishing, true spiritual attainment from just claims was, and frankly still is, critically important.
Okay, so let's set the scene for this. Where and when are we?
Right. So the Buddha is residing in Masali. He's at a place called the Mahavana, the Kugarasala, and there's this group of monks, bhikkhus, who are observing their monsoon retreat, the Vasa.
The Vasa, okay.
They're by the Vagamuda River, and this isn't just like a minor hardship we're talking about. The whole region of Vaji was gripped by a severe famine. The text uses this really stark language. Vihitika setatika salakavuta.
Wow, what does that mean?
It basically means it was incredibly difficult to live on, that even bones were visible, people were depending on, like, little bits of food distributed by sticks, essentially scraps. Survival was genuinely hard. Food was incredibly scarce.
So these monks are there, they're observing the retreat, but they're suffering, naturally.
Yeah, they're suffering. And they start to, ponder how they can endure this retreat comfortably, or at least less uncomfortably, without starving from the lack of alms food.
Makes sense. What options did they consider?
Well, they thought about maybe working for householders or, running errands for them, which were generally discouraged for monks. But they rejected those ideas. They didn't want to do that.
Okay, so what did they decide?
And this is where they take a really dangerous turn. They choose this perilous strategy. They decide to exaggerate their spiritual attainments to the local householders.
Exaggerate, like how?
They basically started telling the lay people that their fellow monks had achieved, really high spiritual states, things like the jhanas, deep meditative absorptions, or that they were stream enterers, once returners, non-returners, even arahants, which is full enlightenment.
Wow, so big claims.
Huge claims. Or that they possessed the 3 knowledges or even the 6 supernormal powers. Essentially, they started praising each other, these incredible made-up spiritual achievements.
Is it?
Yeah, that's the unexpected outcome. It worked astonishingly well. The householders, completely believing these monks were exceptionally virtuous and advanced, gave them the absolute best food and drink they had. Often better stuff than they or their own families were eating.
Seriously?
Seriously. And as a result, these monks, they started looking, the text says, Vantavanto, Penindriya, Pasana Mukhavan, Vipassana Chevan, basically. Really well-nourished, healthy complexions, clear skin. They looked great.
In stark contrast, I imagine, to everyone else suffering the famine.
Exactly. A complete contrast to the other monks in the area who were thin, unwell, clearly showing the effects of the famine.
So what happens when the retreat ends?
After the Vasa, these monks go to visit the Buddha. And, he immediately observes their healthy endurance. He asks them, point blank, how did you manage to live so comfortably during this terrible famine?
And they fess up.
They do. They confess their whole strategy. And this is where the Buddha's response becomes really insightful and incredibly stern. He strongly condemns their actions.
Oh, that's wrong.
He says, and this is a famous line, it's better for one's belly to be cut open with a sharp knife than to claim false, superior human states just for the sake of food.
Wow. That's intense. Better to be disemboweled.
Right. And he explains why. Because the latter, claiming these false states for gain, leads directly to rebirth in a state of woe, a hell realm after death. Whereas physical suffering, even death, doesn't necessarily have that kind of karmic consequence.
That's a powerful condemnation. Better for your belly to be cut open.
Yeah.
And to really drive home the severity of what they'd done, the Buddha didn't just stop there, did he?
Yeah.
He used this as a teaching moment.
He absolutely did. He used their actions as the prime example in this powerful analogy he gives, describing 5 types of great robbers that exist in the world.
5 great robbers.
Okay.
And the specific thing these monks did. He labels it the worst of all.
So what are the other types? Lay them out for us. Okay, so the first great robber he describes is a corrupt monk who basically travels around gaining respect and offerings, robes, food, lodging, medicine, purely by pretense, by faking piety. He compares this monk to a great chief leading a band of actual robbers. They use their monastic guise for material gain.
Okay, so pretense is number one. What's next?
The second type is a corrupt monk who learns the Buddhist teachings, the Dhamma and Vinaya, but then deliberately distorts them for personal advantage. They twist the teachings.
Weaponizing the knowledge itself.
Exactly. The third is a corrupt monk who falsely accuses a genuinely pure monastic of unchaste conduct with no basis. Basically, serious slander against someone else's spiritual integrity.
Okay, that's three. The fourth?
The fourth is a corrupt monk who uses valuable communal monastic property, things belonging to the Sangha, the community, like monastery land, buildings, furniture, tools, anything collectively owned, and they use it to kind of bribe or win over lay supporters for their own personal benefit or influence.
Misusing shared resources. Got it. So pretense, distortion, slander, misuse of property. Which one did the Buddha say was the absolute worst, the chief robber?
Yes, the Agam Mahakoro, the foremost great robber, he says, is the one who does exactly what those monks by the river did, falsely claiming superior human states, the Uttari Manusadhamma, which are completely asantaibuto, non-existent, untrue.
And why is that the worst?
Because, he says, this act is the yayo vobikave ratahaputo, essentially, you have eaten the country's alms food by theft.
So it's not just a personal lie, it's framed as theft. Theft from whom?
Theft from the entire community, from the lay people whose generosity supports the Sangha based on trust and respect for the path. It undermines the very foundation of that relationship.
Okay, and the consequence for this specific act, this chief robbery?
The ultimate consequence, Pārājika.
Pārājika. We heard that term earlier, meaning defeat or expulsion. That sounds incredibly final.
It is. It's an irreversible consequence. The Buddha uses this image. Se atapina matalo matakachino apabo punaveruhia, just as a palm tree with its crown cut off cannot grow again.
Wow.
Such a monk is asamanohoti asakyaputyo, no longer a true monk, no longer a follower of the Buddha, essentially. It means asavaso. No longer in communion, they are expelled for life.
Excommunicated, effectively, because the core principle is broken.
Exactly, because the very foundation of their monastic life, which is supposed to be about genuine spiritual practice and integrity, has been, irrevocably shattered by that specific kind of deception for gain.
That image of the palm tree is just devastating, a kind of spiritual death sentence. It really begs the question, though, what exactly are these superior human states that are so protected? What does Dhamma actually encompass?
Right, that's important. The text is actually quite specific. These aren't just ordinary good qualities or minor achievements. They are defined as profound spiritual attainments, really the pinnacles of accomplishment in the Buddhist path. Things like the various levels of jhana, which are deep meditative absorptions, the vimokkha, or liberations of mind, deep states of samadhi, or concentration, specific types of dhyadasana, knowledge and vision, like the three knowledges about past lives, future rebirths, and the extinction of defilements.
Okay, so very advanced states.
Very. Also, magga bhavana, the actual development of the path, like cultivating the eightfold noble path. Phalasachakirya, the realization of the fruits of the path, so becoming a stream enterer, once returner, non-returner, or an arahant. Kilasapahana, the abandonment of defilements like greed, hatred, and delusion. Even things like Vinivarata Chittasa, the freedom of mind from the hindrances, and Sunyagariya Abhirati, which is taking delight in solitude or empty dwellings, often seen as a sign of detachment.
So we're talking about claims of genuine, deep spiritual mastery.
Exactly. Not just feeling peaceful after meditation, but claiming these specific high-level attainments defined within the tradition.
That's a crucial distinction. But, this brings up a really important point, something that feels very relevant even today. How do you tell the difference between true spiritual experience, someone genuinely maybe overestimating themselves, and, like we're discussing, outright fraud? Is there nuance here based on intent?
Absolutely. And this is a critical distinction the rule itself clarifies, which is fascinating. If a monk makes a claim about having these states, but later admits it was due to adhimana. Yeah, adhimana. It means something like overestimation, conceit, or even a genuine but mistaken belief about their own attainment. If the claim stemmed from that, rather than a deliberate intention to deceive people for gain, like getting better food or respect,
And it's different.
then it is not a Pārājika offense. It's not expulsion. They might still be subject to lesser offenses for, carelessness or conceit, things called thulakaya or dukaya, serious or minor offenses, but not the ultimate penalty of expulsion. The intent to deceive for gain is the absolute key.
That's fascinating. So the internal motivation is paramount. How did they actually try to parse that out in practice? Can you give us some examples of how the consequences might vary based on that intent?
Yeah, the text gives various scenarios. So let's start with the clearest case, direct deception. A monk claims, I have attained the first jhana, or I am a stream enterer, specifically with the intention of getting better offerings or more respect. That's Pārājika. Straightforward expulsion.
Okay, clear cut. What about less direct ways?
Right. What about boasting about others? Let's say a monk boasts that another monk, maybe someone in their lineage, like their teacher's other students, has attained arahantship. If the primary intent behind that boast is to elevate their own status by association.
Bask in reflected glory.
Kind of, yeah. That's considered a thulakaya. A serious offense, needs confession and rehabilitation, but it's not expulsion. The lie isn't directly about their own state for their own direct material gain in the same way.
Interesting distinction. What about even more subtle stuff?
Then there's subtle implication. Imagine a monk doesn't say anything explicit, but maybe they deliberately choose to dwell alone in the wilderness, or go on alms round in a particularly austere way, or even walk or sit with a certain composed demeanor, all done with the internal hope that people will look at them and assume they have high attainments, even though they haven't said a word.
So, kind of projecting an image.
Exactly. Projecting an image with the hope of being perceived as highly attained without making an explicit verbal claim. That, the text says, leads to a minor offense, a dukaya. The deceptive intent is there internally, but the explicit lie isn't spoken.
Wow, that's incredibly subtle. What about accidental revelations, like if someone overhears something?
Good question. Yes, if a monk is perhaps speaking privately about an attainment they believe they have, maybe just reflecting aloud, not boasting, and another monk, or even it says a deity overhears them, that can also be a dukkha, a minor offense, because the intention wasn't public declaration or deception for gain.
Okay. And finally,
Spontaneous utterances. This is interesting. In certain situations, like maybe during a severe illness, if a monk says something that could be interpreted as a claim, like, oh, achieving this state isn't that difficult, or maybe I'm not afraid of death, and people around interpret it as a sign of high attainment.
but the monk didn't mean it that way.
Right. If the monk had absolutely no intention to deceive or make a claim, but was just expressing their internal state or knowledge, then there's no offense at all. It comes back again and again to that core intention to deceive for worldly gain.
This level of psychological nuance and rules from, 2,500 years ago? It's really remarkable, especially that focus on intent. Now, you mentioned earlier, let's shift gears a bit and talk about someone who genuinely did seem to possess extraordinary abilities. Mahāmoggallāna. He was one of the Buddha's chief disciples, right?
That's right. Mahāmoggallāna was renowned, really famous for his psychic powers, his idhi, said to be second only to the Buddha himself in that particular domain.
So what's the story with him in this context?
Well, the text describes this instance where he and another prominent monk, Lakana, are coming down Gijikoa Mountain, Vulture's Peak, near Rajagaha, and suddenly Mahāmoggallāna just smiles, mysteriously. Lakana naturally asks him, "Why are you smiling?" But Mahāmoggallāna says, essentially, not the time or place, ask the Buddha when we see him.
Building the suspense.
Exactly. So when they finally get before the Buddha, Lakana repeats the question, and Mahāmoggallāna recounts what he saw that made him smile. And honestly, these are some truly shocking, graphic visions of karma playing out.
Okay, lay them on us. What did he see?
He describes seeing a series of truly disturbing visions of beings suffering these horrific consequences for terrible deeds done in past lives. He saw what he described as a skeleton chain flying through the air, being torn apart by vultures, crows, and kites, crying out in agony.
A skeleton chain?
Yeah. And the Buddha later confirms this being was a cow slaughterer in Rajagaha in a past life, now experiencing the residual karmic results after presumably spending ages in hell.
Okay, intense. What else?
He saw a skinless man flying, also being torn apart. This was a former sheep butcher. He saw a man with swords for hair and another with spears for hair, where their own hair was falling down and cutting their bodies. These were a pig butcher and a deer hunter.
Gruesome.
Very. A man with needles for hair, the needles entering his head and coming out his body, a former tailor or needle maker who perhaps cheated people, a man with a grotesquely large scrotum being attacked and pecked at a corrupt village chief or official.
Wow. It keeps going.
Oh, yeah. A man immersed up to his neck in an excrement pit, eating excrement identified as either a paramour, an adulterer who violated someone's home, or a specific corrupt Brahmin who once maliciously offered the Sangha a trough of excrement pretending it was food.
Unbelievable.
A headless trunk with eyes and mouth on its chest being torn by birds, a former executioner, or maybe a bounty hunter, and then, perhaps most relevant to our discussion.
Monastic.
Yes. He saw figures identifiable as a monk, a nun, a male novice, and a female novice whose robes and bodies were entirely engulfed in flames, crying out in terrible pain. These, the Buddha confirmed, were corrupt monastics from the time of a previous Buddha, Kassapa Buddha. They had misused their positions and were now experiencing the karmic blowback, the remnants, even after long periods in hell realms.
So Mahāmoggallāna describes all this. What's the reaction?
Well, predictably, perhaps, some of the other monks present start complaining. They basically accuse Mahāmoggallāna of doing exactly what the rule forbids, claiming superior human states by describing these extraordinary psychic visions.
The irony. But the Buddha steps in.
He does, and this is what's absolutely fascinating. The Buddha validates every single one of Mahāmoggallāna's visions. He doesn't just dismiss the complaints, he affirms Moggallāna's ability. He says that disciples like Moggallāna, who possess such clear vision, are eye-like and knowledge-like for the world.
So he confirms the visions were real.
Yes. And then he explains something really crucial. He says that he himself had actually seen these same beings before, but he had chosen not to speak about them.
Why not?
Because, he explains, he knew that most people would not have believed him. Their minds weren't ready for it. And their disbelief, their rejection of this truth, would have actually led to their own long-term harm and suffering, creating negative karma for them.
Wow. That's an incredible insight into compassionate teaching. It's not just about what is true, but what is beneficial for the audience to hear and accept at that time.
Precisely. It highlights the Buddha's incredible wisdom and skill in tailoring his teachings. He knew revealing certain truths prematurely could actually be harmful.
And the validation of Mahāmoggallāna didn't stop there, right? The text gives other examples.
It does. It reinforces that Moggallāna's perceptions were accurate. For instance, Moggallāna comments that the nearby Tapoda River is known for its pure water, yet it flows out steaming hot. The Buddha confirms this and explains why. It flows between two great hells, absorbing their heat.
Amazing detail.
Yeah. In another instance, Mahāmoggallāna accurately recounts the details of a recent battle between King Bimbisara of Magadha and the neighboring Lichavis, including the king's initial defeat and subsequent victory. The Buddha confirms his account is entirely correct.
So political and geographical insight, too.
Seems so, and spiritual states as well. Moggallāna describes attaining a very deep state of concentration and ananja samadhi, but notes he could still perceive sounds like elephants trumpeting nearby. The Buddha confirms that such a state of concentration exists, but qualifies it, noting it's not fully purified if sounds are still perceived. It shows nuance, even in validating high states.
And there was another monk mentioned, too.
Yes, another monk named Sobhita claims to be able to recall his past lives going back 500 eons, which is an immense span of time.
And the Buddha.
The Buddha confirms his memory is accurate, but qualifies it slightly, saying it relates back through one birth, or perhaps one continuous lineage of births within that time frame. But again, the core claim of vast memory is validated.
So, taken together, these instances with Moggallāna and Sobhita clearly show that, according to the tradition, truly realized beings can and do perceive things far beyond ordinary human experience. And when such claims are truthful and presumably shared for a beneficial purpose, not for deceitful gain,
They are upheld. They're seen as valid expressions of genuine attainment. It's a completely different scenario from the monks by the river who were just lying to get better food during the famine.
absolutely, the contrast is incredibly stark. Okay, so let's try to bring this all together. What does all this mean for us, listening today? Let's just quickly recap the 4 Pārājika offenses in the Vinaya.
Right. The 4 ultimate transgressions leading to expulsion are engaging in sexual intercourse, stealing things of significant value, intentionally killing a human being, and the one we focused on today, falsely claiming these superior human states for personal gain. These are the absolute deal breakers, the cutting matters.
So why should someone listening today care about these ancient monastic rules about lying about enlightenment?
Well, I think this ancient narrative isn't really just about monks and rules from millennia ago. It serves as this incredibly powerful lens, doesn't it? To view these really universal human struggles, that desire we all feel for recognition, the temptation maybe to cut corners or deceive for comfort or status, and the really profound, sometimes hidden consequences of inauthenticity.
It definitely underscores the importance of integrity, especially, I imagine, in any field that touches on personal growth, well-being, spirituality, guidance.
Exactly. Anywhere trust is placed in someone's claimed expertise or state of being, and this ancient text offers that stark warning. These false claims of attainment aren't just seen as simple lies, they're framed as theft from the community.
And you can absolutely see parallels today, can't you?
Yeah.
In our world of, spiritual influencers, self-help gurus, online personalities, the pressure to project a certain image, maybe exaggerate achievements, this same principle feels very relevant.
It really does. It challenges us, I think, to critically evaluate who we trust for guidance and to remember that true spiritual progress, or even just personal growth then as now, is fundamentally about genuine inner transformation, genuine work, not just about the outward performance or the material benefits it might bring.
And beyond evaluating others, it also points inwards, doesn't it?
Yeah.
It asks us to reflect on the potential long-term consequences. You could call them karmic, or just psychological of our own actions, even seemingly small deceptions. Are our words and deeds actually aligned with our true state? Or are we, maybe in subtle ways, eating the country's alms, food by theft, in our own lives, benefiting from an image that isn't quite real?
It's a challenging question to sit with.
It really is. So I suppose this deep dive really reminds us that while the specifics change the society, the context, that fundamental human struggle between integrity and expediency, between authentic being and just performative pretense, that remains a truly timeless challenge.
It seems so.
So maybe a final thought to leave people with is, what forms of, let's call it spiritual fraud, or maybe just inflated claims, might we be encountering or even perpetuating in our own lives and communities today? And how might we cultivate the wisdom, that discernment the Buddha talked about, to see beyond the surface and value genuine transformation, both in others and in ourselves?